I was told to be slow, so not come up until the music had stopped. I wasn't being mysterious. Yeah, it's really nice to be here. As Tim said, Bits of Freedom is a digital rights organization. We were founded in 1999, and sort of at the same time as a lot of other digital rights organizations around the world. The most famous one, I guess, is the Electronic Frontier Foundation, based in California. And so our aim is an open and just society. What do we think is needed for that? We think the sort of power of tech has to be in the hands of the people that strive for that. So we are mostly an advocacy organization, so we try to influence tech policy. We do that here in the Netherlands, but also in Europe. And we do that through various different means. So advocacy, as I said, is an important one. We do a lot of research, so technical research, legal research. We try to inform the public debate. So especially our work that deals with the secret services and the police, our main aim is to make sure that legislation that comes into force or that's being developed, that happens out in the open and that people can contribute to a democratic conversation about what powers we feel secret services should have. And then we also do more and more campaigning. So this was a European campaign we launched at the start of 2024. It was called Stay Loud. You can find it on your platformrights.eu. And we launched it with a sort of a coalition of digital rights organizations across Europe. And it explains to people which new rights they have under the Digital Services Act. Years ago, Bits for Freedom advocated for strong privacy legislation in the GDPR, not everyone's favorite bit of legislation. But what we realized afterwards that the law is only as strong as enforcement, and is also will only really have an impact if people know what their rights are and if they're able to exercise them. So that's what we've been focused on with this campaign. Yeah, as I said, we were founded in 1999. This is more or less what our website looked like back then, which I love, maybe more than our current one. And in 2002, we were one of the co-founders of European Digital Rights, which now is a coalition of over 50 NGOs across Europe working on mostly privacy and freedom of communication. That's been our focus since the beginning, so since the 90s, and it really still is. And I think what we've seen over the last years is that those two rights are kind of gatekeeper rights for a lot of other human rights that we have. So in a super digitalized society, the right to privacy protects you from discrimination, it protects your religious freedom, freedom of communication, but protects your right to assembly and protest. So we were asked a while back to come here and talk to you about the Freedom on the Net report. The Freedom on the Net report is an annual global study assessing internet freedom in 72 countries, accounting for 87% of the world's internet users. So about 95 analysts and advisors contribute each year using a standard methodology to determine each country's internet freedom score on a 100-point scale. So sounds super scientific, but I mean, it's still kind of guesswork a lot of times. But we look at things like obstacles to access, limits on content, and violations of user rights. And in the 2023-24 report was the first report that was also going to be looking at the Netherlands. And Freedom House, the organization that coordinates this, asked Bits of Freedom to serve as the Dutch rapporteur. So for that year, we documented key developments and scored the country on 21 separate indicators. And we found that things were pretty okay. Not something Bits of Freedom is used to saying, but sort of looking across, it was, I must say, also kind of interesting for us because we're so focused on the Netherlands and so focused on things that need to be improved, things that we feel should be different. When you take kind of that global perspective, you realize how freaking lucky we are here. So we looked at things like strong access rates, limited website blocking. We have relatively sort of proportionate laws regulating online content. So the Netherlands received an 83, so like a B+ or an A-. I mean, for Bits of Freedom, that's like huge. So these snapshots are really interesting. They tell you a lot about the current state of affairs. But what makes this report, I think, even more interesting and a really powerful tool is that it allows you to see developments across multiple years. So this is the moment in my presentation where I would go to this year's report and tell you how the Netherlands scored this year opposed to last year. Where can we improve? In what areas did internet freedom decline? In what areas did it get better? But I can't do that because the organization that compiles the report at the start of the year received a cease work order from the Trump administration, which meant that all work had to be suspended. So why am I telling you this anyway? So what I thought was interesting that instead of sort of learning about internet freedom from cooperating in this report, doing the analysis, actually the report is teaching us a valuable lesson about our dependence on the US. I work in civil society, and civil society talks about big tech a whole lot. And when I look at Bits of Freedom's work over the last, I would say, 10 years, the work that we do on the freedom of communication to a very large, far too large extent, really focuses on big tech. And not because they've been such great allies in that regard. So when I joined Bits of Freedom in 2014, we still had this sort of back and forth with a few big tech companies where we said, oh, look, this terrible scandal happened. I'm sure you didn't mean to do that. Can you fix it, please? Or, hey, you've taken down the account of this super important NGO ahead of a really important election. I'm sure that was a mistake. Could you please reinstall their account? However, at one point, we sort of realized that big tech wasn't actually doing these things accidentally. And they were, by design, harming the public debate. And there wasn't really any reason why we would consider that self-regulation, which has worked in other domains, that self-regulation would be the answer. So we gave up reasoning with them. In 2019, we did send Google and then still Facebook an invoice for all the time we spent working on their messes, but they haven't paid, which is probably kind of good because we're not allowed to take their money, so that would have been a difficult situation. So as I said, when civil society talks about big tech, usually what civil society means is big tech social media platforms. So the platforms run by Google, Meta, and X. I mean, I don't have to explain to you that big tech is much more than that, and also that their dominance is sort of a challenge through other layers of the stack as well, and maybe even a bigger one. But the reason civil society, I think, is some focus on those social media platforms because those were the places that promised us sort of more democracy, leaving like media gatekeepers. So that's where the promise of more freedom of communication lies or lay. And they're the tools that activists and NGOs use themselves. Anyway, so big tech, much more than social media. It's estimated that Microsoft, Amazon, and Google manage about 3/4 of the data stored in the Netherlands. Approximately 8 out of 10 offices use Microsoft Office, and those are offices of Dutch companies, hospitals, universities, ministries, the police, municipalities. I saw this great research where someone had sent out a question to Dutch municipalities asking them if they were running Microsoft Office for like their core office stuff, and the result was 100%. Big tech controls your smartphone, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, TikTok, if you have that. Maybe this isn't the right age group, but if you have that on your phone. They manage WhatsApp, iMessage, Messenger, probably your email and files. Through Google Search, Chrome, Maps, they have access to your search and location history. I mean, I could go on and on. We could together go on and on, I'm sure. Interestingly, our own research shows that this is completely true within civil society too, and even with within the European digital rights field. Many civil society organizations are largely dependent on big tech for their most basic infrastructure. So everything from sort of cloud to communication tools to outreach and campaigning tools. Big tech often offers free services to NGOs. And even when they're not free, you know, they're so easy, they're so readily available that they're a problem in our own field as well. So just as Russia can threaten to cut off gas supplies, the US can threaten to cut off our communications and the computers that run our schools and hospitals. And the International Criminal Court recently found out that this is not a hypothetical risk. Still, civil society, journalists, the judicial system, we haven't really seemed to have woken up to the urgency of this situation. So what about government? Is government awake? How many people here are actually from outside the Netherlands? Could you raise your hand? Ah, just a few, okay. Yeah, so in the Netherlands, I would say since like January, February, government has been really concerned with this topic, with our digital sovereignty. And the funny thing is, sort of half of government is trying to put out the fire, and the other half is lighting the barbecue. Buying weapons from Amazon, migrating to American cloud platforms, and this, my hometown, the municipality of Amsterdam, kind of embodies both sides. This is a little bit of a schizophrenic situation. Amsterdam is a digital rights city, part of a digital rights network, and a few months ago it issued a blazing press release about its steps towards digital independence. So I guess because it's my hometown, I was extra interested in what they're actually doing. Can we use this as a great example of how other municipalities or cities could do this? But then when you looked into the underlying documents, So what I found there is that the city might, partially, after more research and explorations, possibly move away from big tech in the future. So I mean, most things happen in the future, so you can't really blame them for that. But I really was struck by something they said, which was that they wouldn't do it until they were sure that they could implement alternatives that, quote, still allow us to reach all Amsterdam residents. So can you imagine a municipality that doesn't know where its residents are? And I don't want to make light of this. I know it's super tough. I mean, I run an organization of about 20 people. Who am I, who is Bits of Freedom, to so easily dismiss the objections, the concerns? To make matters worse, I mean, I studied poetry, so what do I know? Well, I know that if we accept those objections and if we accept those concerns, nothing is going to change. Does anyone know who this guy on the left is? So that's Roger Bannister. Does that ring a bell? Any runners in the room? Roger Bannister was the first person in 1954 to run a mile under 4 minutes. So it was the first time that anyone ever did, and actually until then, scientists thought that it was physiologically impossible to do so. And then as soon as he did, and I must say, he was coming from like a devastating defeat at the Olympics a few years before. So he wasn't like in a super great mindset, but he managed. And then after he did, in the 3 years after that, 16 other people did it as well. And now, you know, it's just sort of, yeah, no big deal. So why I mention it is that I think it shows that there is power in imagination and power in good examples. And sometimes you have to just do something to know that you can do it. And then by doing it, you also enable others to do the same, or maybe even better. So in other words, sort of as soon as we adjust our expectations of the possible, I think often we are amazed or could be amazed by what's achievable. So maybe these guys are more well-known. Anyone? Raise your hand if you know 1, 2, 3 of the pictures. So these 3 guys have one thing in common, which is they've all been knighted by our king. We still do that in this country. They've received a lintje, is what you would say in Dutch, a ribbon. It's Piet Beertema, the co-founder of SIDN, Vic Hayes, the godfather of Wi-Fi, and René Penning de Vries, who played an important part in the development of NFC technology. They're not the only individuals to have had an outsized impact on the internet. Every year, Bits of Freedom honors people and organizations who've had a positive impact on our digital rights. And we named that award after Felipe Rodriguez, who co-founded the Dutch internet provider Access for All, the Digitale Stad, and who also played an important role in founding a digital rights scene in the Netherlands. And over the years, the award has gone to Open Whisper Systems for the Signal app. This was way back in the day. Danny Mekic for suing X for shadow banning him. Vido Potters of Bit for consistently demonstrating corporate responsibility. And to Robin Pokorny, who challenged her university's use of discriminatory proctoring software. So to quote architect and inventor Buckminster Fuller, any individual can be a trim tab. So a trim tab, for those who don't know, is a little part of a boat. And it moves directly into the currents that oppose it and uses actually opposition, adversity, resistance to move something that is far bigger than itself. So, and now comes the pep talk, also something Bits of Freedom doesn't often do. What I would really like to share today is, from our perspective, you are some of the most powerful people. And powerful not in isolation, but in relationship to others and to the bigger picture. And it is important to remain powerful. We need a strong European digital ecosystem to restore our autonomy, but also to balance powers in society. So imagine 2025 is the last year in which we were dependent on American technology. The last year when our summer vacations and Christmas dinners were documented frame by frame on big tech's platform. The last year in which we gave Meta and Google unlimited licenses to do with those pictures what they want. The last year we turned a blind eye to the companies who were gobbling everything up in order to create plagiarism machines, facial recognition databases, and other surveillance infrastructure that harms society. Imagine 2025 was the last year your email was sent via Google. The last year our government couldn't hold meetings without Microsoft. The last year the city of Amsterdam needed Elon Musk to find its residents. And to end on a Oprah Winfrey-like note, I want to invite you to look to your left and look to your right. And if one of you were to be knighted in 15 years' time for your contribution to championing Europe's digital sovereignty, who is it going to be? Thank you.
So we don't have any questions from Mentimeter. First of all, thank you very much for the for the inspiring talk. Sorry about that. I went straight into the question part. Are there any questions in the audience? No? I cannot see the back, so I don't see if there's any hands there. But I don't see anybody running or screaming, so I guess not. We did prepare a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. One of them was, you briefly did discuss what Bits of Freedom does, but are there any items that Bits of Freedom works on that you didn't mention at this moment, which are maybe important to know?
Yeah, so a lot of our work is focused on government surveillance, I would say. And then part of it is focused sort of on big tech or corporate surveillance. I think it might be interesting to mention that we actually also a lot of times work with the Dutch tech sector to advocate for things like net neutrality, strong encryption. So there's a lot of overlap, I think, between the work that Bits of Freedom does and the interest that AMS-IX and its members have.
Okay, thank you. And at the end, you spoke about getting loose from the big tech, right? Getting loose from the American big companies, to say it like that. Are there any how do we call these things, developments or projects already ongoing which can help us with that, which we can join maybe, work groups?
So I was afraid you were going to ask for some good examples.
Yes, of course.
So I don't know who you are well enough to know if there is something that you should join. I would say in general so maybe to bring it back to civil society and the research that we did, and I know that's at a super small scale, but just hear me out a little bit. So what we noticed was that civil society was using all these, or is using all these big tech tools. They're not doing that because they're sort of ideologically aligned with big tech or because, you know, they think, I don't know, Zuckerberg is like a really cool dude. They're doing it because, one, they're not completely sure where the harm is. Two, they don't really know what alternatives they should ask for. And then they don't know who they should ask. And then we also saw a lot of like alternative, sort of radical like hosting providers and managed services providers that were saying, hey, look at my really cool open source tool. It's nearly as good as Google's. Why isn't anyone using it? So there seems to be like a bit of a misalignment between what sort of companies or organizations think that people want and need and use, and what people actually want and need and use. So I think if anything, try to get out there a bit more and talk to like end users, talk to people about what they need, because they need help understanding what they should be asking from you.
Okay. Still no questions from the audience? We have two in one go. That hand was raised first on the right side. Please stand up so the microphone can find you. Yeah, there we go. And please state your name and company, please.
Yes, hi. Michel Grijmans, Sincere Cloud. We're based in Curaçao, so not native to Netherlands, but we do speak Dutch. You mentioned the example for the municipality of Amsterdam with regards to reaching their citizens. I assume you mean using social media for getting to them in that example?
I assume that that's what they mean, yeah.
Okay. In that regard, what realistic alternatives would you suggest? Because if you publicize it on their website, I would assume that they would publicize important alerts or messages or whatever on their website, which is, you know, self-hosted and whatnot, not affiliated directly with external foreign social media, whatnot. Mm-hmm. But suggesting that they shouldn't use Facebook, Meta, X, or whatever to communicate with their citizens, I think that's counterproductive, since you would lose eyeballs, you would lose reach, etc. So what exactly would you suggest in order to reduce the reliance? Yeah, because after all, you want to get your message across. So by all means, you should use all measures available to you. Where's the narrative there?
So I would disagree that you should use all measures available to you. I mean, government has pretty invasive measures it could use to reach me. So I think one important thing, so we say at the bare minimum, what you should do is do not publish anything exclusively on big tech. Don't force people to use these tools. But I think it's also fair to say to the city that them being active on these platforms is giving off the signal that what these platforms are doing is completely legitimate, that the privacy infringements that are happening there apparently aren't that important. And then what I think the municipality of Amsterdam has at its disposal is like everything else. So they organize the public space. They can do in that public space not what they want, but they can really use it to their benefit. I received tons of communications at home about things that are happening in my neighborhood. People are still organized offline in places where the government could reach out to them. If you want kids, go to schools. If you want elderly people, go to elderly people's homes. You know, it's not rocket science.
Okay, we have Job. The microphone is, here it is. Job, please stand up and state your name and company.
Job Snijders, speaking for myself. Why is big tech so addictive? Because I want to highlight two examples of recent memory. Google used to be a great search engine. You type in a term, you get results, and you find cool websites that you didn't know before. Then the ads came, and like half of the screen became ads. Okay, sure, we can still see some of the results. Then 2 weeks ago, they started with, I think it's called Gemini, and now the remaining half of the screen is AI slop. And I'm like, where did the search results go? Objectively, this has become a non-functional tool. And then, for instance, with some of the cloud providers that start with an A and end with River, it's really complicated to deploy applications. It's the most expensive choice there is, and yet people migrate to that particular cloud like there is no tomorrow. And but objectively, this has to be one of the worst choices you are making as an organization. And this is on top of concerns that you highlight, like privacy or dependency. So what is wrong with us humans that we flock to the worst possible solution?
Good question.
So I thought that was going to be an easy question, because I do know something about like addictive interfaces. But your question is sort of more fundamental, like why do we keep going back? Yeah, that's a big. Well, that's going to be that shot they're going to use.
Ladies and gentlemen, the cameraman. Sorry.
Not the type of cameras we're usually worried about, but. So I mean, I think one thing that we, of course, saw is that because these big companies, like on a horizontal level, have so many different services, they're able to offer some for free and others not. So they sort of like rope you in with the cool, shiny, free stuff when it was still like usable. And like the more, I guess, you become invested into these walled gardens, the higher the cost it is to leave. I don't know if that's true for sort of like the cloud environment, because I just don't know as much about that. But what I hear a lot from civil servants is, like, one, we're worried about the costs of the services we're receiving now. We're worried how they're going up every year, and how we're actually kind of stuck or held hostage within these systems. But then they also say, switching costs would be too high. So there's a weird, I guess the way we're making those calculations at the moment isn't the right way. Like if you break it down to like an economic or a financial issue, maybe we should start looking at how we calculate these investments. Maybe we're not doing it sort of long-term enough. I don't know. Do you have an idea?
Yeah.
But yeah, Google sucks.
So. Well, is that the answer you were hoping for?
He got me to squirm a little bit, so.
I mean, it is an open-ended question. It would be really cool if you just could tell me, like, yes, this is why we do things the way we do them in humanity. But it boggles my mind how we're afraid of rising costs. So we invest in a platform that is the most expensive and the hardest to leave. It makes no sense.
Yeah,
Well, we can always ask Google, right? With the Gemini result. So we are a bit over time. Where we started actually with a lot of time left for a lot of questions. With the last one we went over. So I really need to thank you.
Yes,
I
thank you
want to
very
thank you for your talk. And ladies and gentlemen, Evelyn Austin.
Thank you.